Good morning.
And we are also live on YouTube. Great. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for another episode of From the Ground Up, a webinar series featuring Toronto's most innovative city builders and the story behind the movement they built. I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. My co-host and dear friend is Lirad Kligman, the co-founder of the Yorkville team, residential and commercial sales team in Toronto. If this is the first time you're joining us, so first of all, please connect with us on LinkedIn. And if this is the first time you're tuning into this webinar series, it's an opportunity to ask the questions that we usually don't get the chance to ask, let's admit it. So Lirad, please introduce our guest today.
All right, so we are honored to be joined by Mr. Dermot Sweeney today. He's founding principal of Sweeny&Co Architects, a leading industry innovator in real estate in Canada. Dermot brings together a unique blend of building and urban design, economics, real estate development, and adaptive reuse to maximize the value of each of the firm's projects for the benefit of occupants and owners alike. Dermot has brought global and national corporations such as Microsoft, Loblaw, TELUS, RBC, and BMW to the forefront of sustainability, with commissions ranging from commercial office towers, head offices, mixed use and residential developments, academic institutions, to hospitality and retail interiors and transit-oriented developments. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today, Dermot. Why don't you quickly take us through?
Lirad, I think we had a little bit of a technical, he will disconnect and join us because he couldn't hear the sound.
Oh, I see. Okay. There he is.
Dermot, is it better now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Perfect. Okay, you missed the introduction, but let's jump right into the first question, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So Dermot, why don't you give us a bit of a background of your path and how you got to where you are today?
Bit of a background. Okay. I was, when I graduated, working with the Tom Partnership, which was fantastic. It was great fun. Ron Tom, unfortunately, died in 1986. And by 87, we were trying to figure out how to set up a new firm. And at that time, I decided it was a reasonable time to set out on my own course. The end of the 80s was very, very busy. So I thought I had a reasonable chance of getting something going. And I had met a couple of interesting people who had expressed interest in working with me. So that was a big year in 87. I got married, took a little bit of time off, the last time I ever had a 3-week vacation, and started the firm back in the late fall. Officially, I guess it was February 88 when I got my certificate of practice. At that time, I knew nobody would call a 29-year-old architect. So I think I set out on a very different path that was fairly interesting. I did believe very much. I had a lot of confidence, not only in myself to a degree, but also in others, and in the spirit of collaboration with some good people. I set out to start a firm. One thing we did very, very differently back then, knowing that no one would call, was we actually set up to do things differently. I created a system whereby I thought I could create work, manufacture work for the firm. And what that really meant was understanding development as best I could, studying development, trying to understand real estate development. And in doing so, learned how important zoning was, the official plan, land ownership. So I would spend quite a bit of time on weekends walking precincts of the city, in the core of the city of Toronto, with a clipboard. And on the clipboard, I would have property data maps. I would have acetates showing what the OP was and acetates showing what the zoning was. And I would look for underdeveloped opportunities or opportunities for buildings. Then I would approach the landowners. I had a friend who was a lawyer who could figure out who the landowner was. and I would contact the landowners to see if there was interest in adding value to their land. If there were, most of the time there wasn't. Of course, I got the phone slammed on me most of the time, but I was persistent and turned up a couple of interesting opportunities. I also knew people that said if I found opportunities, they might be interested in investing. So it was a very interesting way to get work going in the firm. We started with a project which is still there today, the Derby building, which was a carryover from, we had started at Ron Tom. The client chose to go with me, and we completed that building at the corner of King and Parliament, which was very interesting. There is something to be said for being naive when you start a firm, because naivety often leads to taking chances and doing things that someone with more experience would never do. It was, in fact, the very first rezoning from an industrial designation to a residential designation. When I met with the councillor of the day, Barbara Hall, she actually said to me, Dermot, this has never been done. This will never happen. This doesn't happen in Toronto. You're crazy. This cannot happen. So I said, well, not knowing how correct she was, I just thought that was another impediment. And what the heck, life was full of impediments. Walls to climb over. So eventually we did get it through, and it led to some interesting stuff that happened in Toronto after that. The city started to look at why were we holding on to so much industrial land in the core. Most of the city of Toronto outside the financial core was made up of industrial buildings. Years later, and I think we had some influence in that, and certainly working with Paul Bedford at the time, Barbara Hall became mayor, and we worked together. Mark Sterling was in on the group. There was an internal group to the city, an external group, and together I think we pushed hard and came up with the RA bylaw, regeneration, which I think is one of the more significant changes to the city of Toronto, which was fantastic. It opened up all the brick and beam buildings for conversion, and it got things going. But I guess generally what we tried to do was find a niche where we could bring business people together, landowners together, the city together, and create opportunities. And out of that, most of the time, we got the architecture. So it was interesting. But I think the key to starting a firm when you're very young is to believe in yourself, believe in others. Collaboration is the key to good architecture. I've always believed that. And I think you start a conversation with a wider group of people if you involve business and development. So I think that was very key to our starting. The bottom fell out of the market in 1990, and we went through a total and complete collapse in Toronto. I think someone told me there were less than $4 million worth of permits pulled in 1991. So you can imagine how devastating that was. Many, many firms were lost, architecture firms and even engineering firms were lost at that time. That was a huge setback, very, very difficult to deal with, especially having two young babies at home by that time. So we really knuckled down and sort of figured out that we needed to reinvent ourselves. I had done some restaurant work and hospitality work as an interior designer. While at Ron Tom's office, we had done some restaurants. And so we got into the hospitality business, convinced certain people to revamp and reposition. We got into that business and did well with it after a staggering couple of years in 1991. But it was interesting. You had to be fleet of foot, change how you approach things. And I think all the way through that, probably the most important thing to get yourself out of bed in the morning is a belief that you can do it. You can make a difference, that you were well educated, you're reasonably smart, and you've got to get up and get at it. And we worked very hard to keep in the industry. One of the big saving projects for us was landing the revamp and total renovation of the Prince Hotel in Toronto, which was fantastic. I think the other thing is to find leads, to find work. And if you believe in yourself and you have a certain level of confidence, you can convince others. Not many, but a few. And it's those few that keep you going, keep the work coming through. We also, I think, had a very different philosophy inside the office. We believed that everybody was a contributor. Everyone had something to say, and we worked hard as a team. The early 90s were tough. It was our only layoff in our 33 years. Was actually in 1991. We had to lay off 4 people. But I think the other thing that would be important is to understand that, well, at least I understood. I may not have been right, but I did believe that if you could focus on slightly larger projects, you would develop the firm into something that would be more interesting and of a larger size. I had seen lots of people start with small projects, and 10 years later, they were still doing small projects. And I think that became clear to me that I had to go after bigger, larger things, in spite of the fact that the level of confidence dropped off. You'd never done one before, but what the heck, together we could do it.
And Dermot, just to build on that note, how do you go about convincing potential clients that you're the right person to take on this massive project that you haven't necessarily done before? How do you go about sharing your dream and getting them to believe in you?
Well, I guess part of it is you have to exude some confidence. You have to believe that together you could do it. And that often involves a participation level from a client that maybe they're not used to. You have to admit what you know and what you don't know, and find out what you don't know. That's really key. If you understand what you don't know, you'll find out, you'll dig deeper, and you'll create something. But I think there was also something very important, and that was there tended to be, and there always has been in development, certainly in the private sector, a tendency towards formula. And I think that became extremely real during the modernist period, when it became fairly obvious that if the formula was right and worked in the past, you could do it again. We tended to be not necessarily against formula, but we believed that part of the role of architecture was to innovate, was to find new solutions that would be better. So one of the ways you can sometimes convince someone to do something is if you have an idea that they are convinced, at least partially, is a good one. And to do that is innovation. And if you look at the Derby building as an example, they were amongst the first 2-story loft type apartments and had to go through all kinds of good things to get it done. One giant window, not a window in every bedroom, 2 stories, open loft space. But I believe those units would be better, more livable, and attract a certain following. And I think the building has done well ever since. There's actually quite a number of architects live in it, apparently. But to go at things with some innovation and to challenge and to try to think differently and convince others to look at things differently. We went beyond the Derby and did many different variations on the 2-story loft. The idea of the shared space, a higher volume, more natural light. And we ended up doing them in mid-rise and then, of course, a high-rise building, which was quite a challenge. I have always been also very interested in making things. I grew up in a factory. When I say that, I didn't live in the factory, but I was there every weekend from a young age, and rebuilding sports cars long before I had a license. We had the ability to do welding and all kinds of stuff in my dad's shop. So it was always interesting to look at how things were made, how they became, apart what goes into tool and die making and machinists and all the rest, which I was very well exposed to. Product design, which I did from the age of 14, 15, assisting my dad. Those were all good things to give one some confidence, knowing how things were made, materiality, those kinds of things. So I think that led to a bit of the confidence, but never confidence to the point where you couldn't admit you didn't know and you work together. And if you expose someone, I think the fact that you don't know and that together we can figure this out, people align. They start to align with you. It's quite interesting that way.
Dermot, speaking of innovation, your architecture practice is not a typical one. You understand urban economics and understanding other aspects of development. Can you share with us in what way your practice is different? And I'm also pretty sure the audience is curious to know how many of the projects overall in the span of 35 years, what percentage was work that you brought as more development oriented versus just the architect?
I think the percentage is now much lower because we've done a fair body of work and people are interested in our abilities as architects to bring value. So the percentage went down a lot. I think in the early days, it was probably 90% of what we did, 80% anyway. The restaurant world changed that for a short term, and then we got back into bringing projects back to life. I think over the 34 odd years or whatever it is, I think it's probably somewhere around 50 to 60% of the work we've ever done has been projects that we made happen, or certainly had a big hand in making them happen. I'll give you one example. We've bought, well, several examples. We also bought older buildings when the time was right. Myself, I would usually find it. I could never afford the whole building, so I would bring in partners and I would talk to them about what we could do to the building. Those buildings included 468 Wellington, which our office was located in for many years. 372 Bay, which was a classic old office building. It's still there at Bay in Richmond, which we fixed up. But probably the most interesting one was I had a lot of ideas about how we could change the world of the office building. And I went and approached many, many, many developers of office buildings and talked to them about a new way, a new approach. And most people actually said to me, interesting things. I'll paraphrase it a little bit. Change is risk, and risk is not necessarily what the world of real estate wants to involve themselves in. There's a lot of risk in it already, so let's not add risk. Let's not change the formula. Let's look at doing something the way we've done it before and within the formula we know could work. So after being frustrated by that for many years, I decided to convince an investor to buy an office building. And we bought the building up in Don Mills. It was completely empty. The basement had 8 feet of water in it. The building was in bad shape. We stripped it right back to concrete and we started utilizing all of the technologies and working with Canadian companies to develop a whole system of new technologies to make the building. And from that was really the first underfloor air multi-tenant building. From that building, we launched into Microsoft's headquarters. Loblaw saw Microsoft, and we got Loblaw's headquarters. And soon enough, we were working on millions of square feet of office, which was fantastic. But you had to go out and buy a building and fix it to do that, to show people what the value was. So I guess over the years, it's probably been 50, 60% of all that we've done. And we still to this day try to create opportunities. We see things happening in the city. We look for opportunities. We call clients, people we know, and we suggest that this might be something to really take a run at. which we did with Menkes, a great client at Waterfront Innovation. So that's a very recent building. Waterfront Toronto was talking about looking for a partnership or a great new office building. We called Menkes, we worked together with them and created the winning scheme, which was great. So it's still going on today. We're still doing it. We're still looking at parking lots, and we do assemblies from time to time. We have a project at Adelaide and Portland, which we bought with partners. We rezoned it and then brought in Minto, and we're working with Minto now and completing the building. It's been a great success. So there are a number of medium, small, and larger projects we're still out there creating.
So in terms of your practice, let's say a new client comes in, is there any, beyond the architectural service, what other aspects do you provide either as a service or as an add-on to, value add?
The practice has, it has in-house planning, professional planner, Alexi, in the firm. We have my son, who's got business degree and works with me on trying to understand the finding land, finding opportunity. He and I talk about it all the time. He is now with us full time. So we have had others in the past augment what I can do in development. So there are projects, we have several currently where we act as development consultant to a project. So we're working on one right now where we found the land, my son did. We tested it, we looked at it, we thought it was a fantastic potential project. We approached the owner. The owner did not want to sell, but wanted to stay in. And so we're working with them hand in hand now to develop a building and get the zoning done. And then we'll bring in, obviously, a developer who does condominiums or rental building and partner them up later. So we sort of make these marriages as we go, as we see opportunities. It's important to understand where the city's going, where it's been, what's happening, and look for opportunities. It's very difficult with the little bit of land that's available for development. It's very difficult to find land that can work. So it's often a lot easier for all of us if you don't have to buy it. So it's a lot easier to work with someone and have them enjoy the value add that we bring. So that's something we do as well.
And it's pretty great that you're able to bring on the next Sweeney generation to work with you. So you've got your son and your daughter who work with you at the company now, right?
Yes, my daughter is an architect and does great work. She's part of a really good team. I mean, the vast majority of the firm is architecture. So she's part of that great team. And it's fantastic that we have, well, up until COVID, we would every Thursday go for a family lunch, which was great with my daughter and son. I never would have believed that possible, and they put up with me, I guess. It's not bad. It's a great thing if you could do it. But yeah, they're integral part of who we are and what we do, which is great. Makes it more fun too.
That's fantastic, for sure.
I also can't lose my temper at all. Just kidding. No, it's not bad.
So a lot of our audience are entrepreneurial in nature, and at some point, whether they've already started a business or in the near future. So one of the key questions that we like to ask are, what are a few core pieces of advice that you've learned over the years that you can then pass on to the next generation of entrepreneurs?
Well, I think vis-a-vis architecture, one of the things that has always bothered me is the fact that school, you take all these smart kids who get out of high school, mostly at the top of their class, they find a way into architecture, and we do our best over the 5-6 years to strip them of any dignity, to take them down onto their knees, to make them feel like they're incidental, unimportant, not very good at what they do. I always pushed back. I was the kind of guy, I guess, at school, I got A's and D's. sort of C plus average, I guess. But I always thought that of anything, school was the most important place to throw your imagination on the wall, to try and come up with innovation, to see things differently and really try. And of course, when you approach school that way, you can often fail and you can often excel. So it was, who knows what was coming out of Dermot's head on the next project, but it was always interesting and always led to great debate. I believe confidence is very, very key to success and to risk taking. It's very hard to ask someone to take a risk if they don't believe in themselves. I also think it's very, very important, you know, to be an entrepreneur in architecture or in development or anything to do with city building, it takes a tremendous amount of money. It takes a tremendous, not necessarily when you're starting out, but it's a very capital intensive business. So people are resistant to change. As I've said, they're resistant to risk. So the more you can learn about how it works, how finance works, how mortgages work, how development works, how the city process works. These are all key issues and can be learned fairly readily in fairly short order, by paying attention, by discussing, by asking. But what all that really means is you're better in a collaborative group than you are alone. It's very difficult to try and change things or get yourself in a position where you're wanted or needed or seen as a team player without building your own team. I think it's really key that we look at, you know, especially today, there's more and more expertise required. I mean, just the process of getting something approved takes an inordinate amount of expertise and huge number of people. I think the first ever zoning I applied for, there were 10 or 11 agencies that reported on it. Now, I don't know, there's 40, there's a lot. So to understand it, but no one has to be an expert, because one of the other good things about architecture and city building and development is it's a process that takes a lot of time. So you don't have to know it all going in, but you can learn and admit what you don't know and really take it seriously in terms of finding out, so that you're there to give good answers, good advice, and doing it with confidence. I think that's the key, you know, but you have to take risks. And a lot of people, it's very difficult to take risks. Together, people will take risks. Often alone, it's very difficult to do so.
Dermot, today is not 1987 and the market is different. So, you know, saturated, competitive. If you were starting out today, would you start the same way by looking for current opportunities? And, you know, I just have to say, and it's more of a thought, when you said about that, you know, understanding economics or providing other services, the first thing that came to mind is liability. Why? And, you know, the OAA does a really good job scaring us to stick to liability and don't say a word about dollar value and don't say a word about, and there's one thing understanding it, and it's a whole other different story providing that service. So I'm just, you know, looking at the list, and I always like to look the name on the audience. What advice would you give architects that are starting out in 2021?
I've got some interesting ideas that way. So you're not going to buy a corner and build a tower. You know, you're competing with everybody else, and that's a well-oiled machine, that development world, and they're all good at it. But where's our greatest need coming, right? Back when I started, I saw a real need for the conversion of buildings. I saw a need for the conversion of zoning from industrial to open things up. I saw a need for more apartments, for unique solutions. Today, we face an enormous amount of a huge number of issues, right? Less land, going higher, going bigger. What that means typically is you need much more capital. So where I see a great place to start and to think differently is within neighborhoods. I know it's impossible, and they're highly protected. But what is interesting is the official plan allows for 4 stories. So is there a way that you could get together with a couple of friends, an investor, and say, I'm going to take this lot or these 2 houses, and I'm going to find a way to create fabulous, excellent living space where there is a collective notion or a shared amenity called the back garden, where we can create really good apartments and great places to live. And take that on as, because that is, you can do that. If you can buy a house, you can bring some people together and buy 2. Maybe even you bring more people together, you buy 3. You start to assemble, you look at what is the potential, understand rental rates, understand the cost of land relative to the unit. It's a great way to start at something much smaller, 4-plex, 6-plex, 12-plex. You start to look at, how do we make a better place to live that is also conducive to what is very difficult to achieve these days, which is family life, right? So many people, they start to think about having a family, and the automatic is, I need a back garden, or I need a house. I have to move further afield. I have to move further away. What's interesting, is one of the first projects I did as an entrepreneur was I bought a house and converted it into apartments. And then we shared the back garden. So we took a regular house in Parkdale, we made it into 3 apartments. We had a great little amenity out the back that the 3 apartments shared in. I sold that house to be able to buy another one. We did it again. These were things that could get us going. You started to learn about construction. You really got into the whole approvals process. But somebody's got to raise the bar and take on this notion of, soft density or new infill, and really do something with it. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there to add units within the neighborhood. And it's not expensive to start. Not nearly as expensive as most other types of development. So I think there's really interesting promise there. And we need innovation. We really need what people can do. And that's where architects can shine. They can really come up with innovative, efficient, great solutions, find ways to build them better, look at different types of materials, find ways to execute. It's the world's your oyster when it comes to that. There's a lot out there to pick from. And it'd be nice to see someone push the envelope a little bit, maybe come back and tell us that 5 and 6 stories is a little better. I'll jump behind you anytime. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Well, when someone from our audience does that, then we'll have them on this show, and we'll recap that conversation.
Perfect. I'd love to help, because to me, it's the biggest struggle we face in the city now. We have huge amounts of density into small areas we're not tackling. And when you look at a lot of the downtown neighborhoods, they're already not what they were. They're not single family homes. I mean, there are whole pockets of neighborhoods that have very few single family homes. And as you move further from the core, you're starting to see the opposite, which is duplexes, triplexes being made back into single family homes based on affordability. But in the core, most of the majority of the housing is already apartments, and not necessarily good ones. So there's a real opportunity there to go into neighborhoods, and certainly on the edge conditions around avenues as well, and try and come up with a new, really good housing type. That would be a fantastic challenge, and I know it would succeed. If you got it right, it would be very successful.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for leaving it off with a look to the future for us. And that brings us to the end of our episode today. So Dermot, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights and for showing us that with a little bit of risk and with some innovative thinking, you can really become successful, and you don't have to follow in the same footsteps as everyone else in the industry. So thanks for joining us again. Thanks.
Oh, it was great fun. It was good fun. That's great.
Great.
I encourage everybody to think a little differently. What the heck?
Absolutely. That's the only way we're going to grow.
Okay.
Our next speaker is William Gardner. He's the founder of Garlock Developments, and he'll be with us in 2 weeks on Tuesday, April 6th at 11 a.m. So hope you're all going to join us again. Go like us on LinkedIn, follow us, and we'll all be in touch for next time. Thank you very much.